A self-made couple making plans for the next stage of their lives.
They were getting ready to have a quiet retirement.
They were such a beautiful couple. They would give you your shirt off their back.
They had a lot of friends and loved spending time with family.
Gunned down, execution style, in their own home.
It just seemed to make no sense. Who would do that, and what could possibly be the motive?
While searching for the killer, investigators uncover a world of greed and deceit.
We looked at desperation. She was desperate for money.
He felt he had been treated badly, basically kicked to the curb.
People were saying that he was very upset. It certainly is motive.
A series of chilling discoveries.
We learned that he was receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Everything he's told us is a lie.
Points to a killer no one ever imagined.
People were shocked.
It shows what a messed up psyche he's got.
It was unbelievable how somebody can be that cold-blooded.
Outskirts of La Crosse, Wisconsin, lies the prestigious neighborhood of Berry Mills. In early spring of 2010, this quiet community is rocked by a disturbing 911 call.
911, what is the address today? Okay, what's going on?
I'm in my mom and dad's house. I came out to check
Your dad is what?
He's on the floor.
Where's your mom?
My mom is by the computer.
Is your mom breathing?
No.
Okay, and your dad is not breathing?
No.
Okay, all right.
Police race to the scene. First responding officers lead 40-year-old Eric Cola away from his deceased parents' home, while detectives head inside.
We could see that there was a male lying on the kitchen floor. There was a large pool of blood around his head.
The blood was coagulated, so it had been there a while. You know, it wasn't fresh blood.
He was holding his car keys in one hand. He had his coat on, so it was clear that he had just walked in the door. He hadn't even set everything on the counter yet. As I viewed the male victim, the wound appeared to be a gunshot. It was near the temple of his head.
Around the corner is like a hallway entryway with a computer desk, and the female victim was there. She was shot in the head also.
Her hands are on the keyboard, and so you could see that she hadn't been typing before she was shot. What she was typing didn't appear to be significant, but it made us believe that she had no idea that someone was behind her going to shoot her. It appeared that they ambushed them.
The victims are identified as 68-year-old Dennis Cola and his wife, 65-year-old Myrna. As investigators examine the scene, they make note of other telling details.
We didn't know if it was a single killer or more than one person, but you would expect more disturbance if there were more than one, or that they would have overpowered the victims, and that didn't seem to have happened.
With Myrna sitting at the computer comfortably, it led us to wonder if she was the first to be killed. And her husband, Dennis, came home, and he was the second one shot. There was the smell of decomposition. At that point, we weren't sure how many days earlier they were killed, but we needed to get information pretty quickly.
Detectives find no sign of forced entry and no indication of any kind of struggle.
The crime lab comes in. They collect fingerprints and DNA and a computer for analysis. We went upstairs and we noticed in the one bedroom there was a dresser that was disturbed, and it appeared that it had been ransacked. What was unusual about it was the person started at the top and worked their way down with the chest of drawers. But if you did it that way, you wouldn't be able to see what was in the drawer below it.
This looked like someone was trying to make it look like a burglary, but nothing seemed to be missing.
And there were many other valuables in the house, including Myrna's purse, and Dennis' wallet was still in his back pocket. It looked like this was staged, quite frankly.
While investigators continue searching for clues, they find what could be a key piece of evidence.
The bedroom had a .22 rifle in the closet. There's also a box of .22 shells on a shelf that had been moved and partially opened.
That was very possibly the gun that was used in the homicides.
So the gun is sent to the crime lab for an analysis.
As the crime scene investigation continues, news of the murders spreads quickly through the close-knit community.
When I heard about it, I thought, I can't believe this is happening. I was devastated. It hit me real hard. It was like, why would somebody kill them? Everybody loved them.
Born and raised in Wisconsin, Dennis and Myrna Cola had been happily married for 42 years.
Dennis and Myrna had a lot of friends. They had deep roots here.
They had children and grandchildren, and they were very popular.
I didn't hear of anyone that had anything bad to say about either one of them.
From humble beginnings, Dennis rose to become a successful businessman.
Dennis had graduated as a pharmacist, and he had owned a number of pharmacies and businesses throughout the years in different locations.
I worked with him for 2 years. As a boss, he was down to earth, fantastic guy. If you needed something, he was there. He treated me like a daughter.
Dennis was successful in life and in love.
Him and his wife, they were always happy, having a good time. Myrna had a lot of energy. She was very sociable.
Myrna was very well educated, and she was presently teaching part-time on a substitute basis.
They had a good marriage. They enjoyed life.
The couple had 2 children, their son Eric and 37-year-old daughter Cindy. Both were married with families of their own.
Their family seemed pretty tight. Dennis and Myrna, they were involved with their kids and involved with their grandkids.
These were parents who were very dedicated. They really wanted the best for their kids and loved spending time with family. Dennis and Myrna were getting ready to have a quiet retirement and relaxing and enjoying life.
Now, those dreams have been brutally snatched away.
Both shot. I would have never in my life expected something like this to happen.
It just seemed to make no sense. We're trying to understand who would do that and what would be the motive.
While police bring the Cola's son Eric into the station to get more information, investigators go door to door looking for witnesses.
We start canvassing to see if anyone saw anything, heard anything.
Nobody in the neighborhood had seen anything suspicious.
For them, it was just mostly shock. They couldn't believe that these 2 people had been killed.
As detectives continue to search for a lead, they get their first break.
One of the neighbors mentioned that he thought he knew the motive and why it happened, and also the murder.
He was very concerned. He believed that his life was in danger. He felt that he may be next.
This neighbor, Steve Burgess, was a banker, and he thought that he may have been the intended target of the homicide. His reasoning was he had got a threatening call multiple times from a person that threatened to kill him.
Coming up, new evidence emerges.
The day after the homicides, he cashed his $50,000 check and never told us.
And family secrets come to light.
There was some jealousy, maybe bad blood between the 2.
Dennis always complained that he was worthless and that he didn't want to work.
She had apparently lit into Dennis in a rage.
Until a disturbing clue reveals a twisted plan.
Someone had put this threatening note in his mailbox.
Now he believes that someone was out to get him.
And exposes a cold-blooded betrayal nobody saw coming.
I never thought he was the kind of person that would do something like that.
It was extremely unexpected.
It's just chilling.
Have been brutally executed in their own home. Now, one of their neighbors, banker Steve Burgess, tells investigators the killer could be coming after him.
He was very concerned, and he believed that someone was out to get him. And he didn't know who, but the homicides may have been intended for him and his family.
Detectives ask Steve why someone would want him dead.
So at that time, the market crashed. There was people with money issues.
A lot of people came to him at the bank for loans, but they had no collateral. So people were very angry that Steve would not give them loans. The last threat was a couple of days earlier. It was a threat of violence. It certainly had to be taken serious.
If Steve was the intended target, how did Dennis and Myrna end up gunned down instead?
What he explained was a Google Earth search in front of Burgess's house showed the wrong address, showed Dennis and Myrna's address instead of his, and he thought that the killer killed the wrong people.
He felt that somebody had come to his house to follow through on the threat, but they ended up at Dennis and Myrna's residence. It was a concern that this possibly could have been a mistake on behalf of the murderer, and the homicides were not intended for Dennis and Myrna.
Before investigators can pursue the lead, the autopsy results arrive.
The autopsy report determined that they were both shot with a .22 caliber rifle.
But it was inconclusive. There wasn't enough bullet fragment left to tell if it came from the gun that we found in the house. No fingerprints were found. I mean, even from the victims, like the gun had been cleaned up.
The autopsy report also confirmed that they had been deceased for a few days before the 911 call. It was likely that they were killed on that Friday.
The time of death sheds new light on the threatening phone call made to neighbor Steve Burgess.
We saw that call had come in Sunday morning after the Coolas were murdered. So the timeline it didn't make any sense.
We were able to determine that the threats against Steve Burgess had nothing to do with the deaths of Dennis and Myrna.
With their first lead a bust, detectives turn their attention closer to home.
We knew Eric and his sister Cindy were very close to their parents.
Eric did day trading and stuff like that, work on stocks. He was doing well. Dennis and Eric were pretty close. Some people would say like bread and butter. They'd have get-togethers all the time.
Eric was the one that found the bodies. We needed a conversation with Eric for information that he might be able to provide us.
Hoping he can provide details about the crime, investigators interview Eric at the station.
Eric was still extremely emotional over the deaths of his parents, but he said he wanted to be as helpful as he possibly could and would do whatever he could to try to find who was responsible.
Detectives ask how he came to find his parents had been killed.
He said the school called and said that Myrna hadn't shown up for work. They called his parents and they didn't respond.
So Eric tried calling and was unable to get an answer, so he called his sister and asked if she had any contact with them, and she had not.
He became concerned and drove over to the house.
Once he walked in the house, he observed his father lying on the kitchen floor and started searching for his mom, and then also found her deceased.
Eric said he was extremely close to his parents. His dad, supported all of his endeavors. They were just the best of buddies.
We asked Eric what was the last time he had seen his parents, and he said a few days before the homicides.
He visited them like he did all the time. He said his dad was working on the deck, and his mom was doing laundry. There didn't seem to be anything unusual.
Investigators ask Eric where he was on the day of the murders.
He said that Friday was he and his wife's anniversary. He had worked till 2. Then he helped his buddy Mike do some work in a bathroom. They were renovating a bathroom. Eric had told us that he had gone to 2 stores after leaving his buddy's house, looking for a specific plant that his wife liked, a hanging plant.
Eric presents a receipt stamped at 6:15 p.m.
After he bought the plant, he went directly home, and they got ready to go out for the evening with friends to celebrate the anniversary. Eric said that he had tried over the weekend to contact his parents and wasn't able to do so. He was becoming concerned, but just thought that they were busy.
When asked who might have wanted to harm his parents, Eric says they were well-liked and had no enemies.
It seemed really strange, really unusual. No reason for the victims to be killed, both victims killed.
Before concluding Eric's interview, detectives get results back from the crime lab.
The report came back indicating that the time of death, based on the computer analysis, was 5:41 on that Friday.
Myrna was using the computer, and the last keystroke was 5:41 p.m. So that gave us a timestamp. That's huge.
With the keystroke data, detectives verify Eric's alibi.
We spoke to his friend Mike, and Mike said yes, Eric was here until about 5:30 when he left, and he was going to go to the store. So he basically confirmed what Eric was telling us was correct. The receipt, combined with what his friend Mike said, it appeared that there wasn't enough time for Eric to commit the crime. Also, it just seemed very unlikely that someone who loved his mother and father very much could be involved in something like this.
Before Eric leaves the police station, he remembers crucial information that takes detectives by surprise.
Eric had told us that his sister Cindy and her husband Pat were being financially supported by Dennis and Myrna, and that their dad, Dennis, told Cindy they were getting cut off financially.
The Friday morning of the homicides, Cindy had called Dennis. Dennis let her know that there was not going to be any more money. She became very upset.
Had there been an argument over money, leading Cindy to kill?
That's extremely unexpected, but she did have motive, so you start looking at Cindy as a suspect.
Believe their daughter Cindy may have been angry with her father after he cut off financial support. The two had a tense conversation just hours before the murders.
When we started talking to the circle of friends and family, we were told Dennis was more than generous. He gave tens of thousands to Cindy and her husband.
Cindy relied on her parents. They needed this money to pay their bills. When Dennis had told Cindy that he was cutting her off, she didn't know how those bills were going to get paid.
Detectives learn the Cola's children are set to inherit over $700,000 from their parents' death. While son Eric is known in the community as a successful businessman, Cindy's circumstances are different.
Cindy didn't have much money, if any, and she was constantly asking for money because they were not making ends meet.
She was working a minimum wage job or a little above that, and Pat, her husband, couldn't keep a job, would quit or get fired. They were living paycheck to paycheck and Dennis's handout to handout.
Me and Dennis would talk about Cindy at the pharmacy, and he kept telling me that he was sick and tired of supporting her every month, helping them out with their bills and stuff like that. And that Friday morning, he was very upset, and he said, "My daughter called me this morning, crying on the phone because I told my daughter that I'm cutting her and her husband off."
When she would get upset, she would get just extreme, over-the-top emotions. Cindy hearing that the cash cow was being butchered would be a reason for her to now go off the rails, and it went from bad to worse.
Cindy became a strong suspect.
Police bring Cindy into the station for questioning.
Cindy appeared broke up over the deaths of her parents, but she really laid out the family dynamic. Her parents had considered her the black sheep of the family. She said that she didn't believe her parents cared about her like they cared about Eric, and she was upset with how they treated her.
She told us, according to her parents, that Eric could do no wrong and that Cindy was a disappointment and continued to be a disappointment.
But Cindy denied that she had anything to do with her parents' death, even though there was this friction between them.
Investigators question Cindy about the argument with her father the morning of the murders.
Cindy downplayed the conversation she had with her father. She said just that she was disappointed her father had said he wouldn't give her any money. But it wasn't a negative conversation.
Detectives wonder if Cindy is more guilty than she's letting on.
There was a lot of tension between Cindy and her parents. There was disapproval there.
We looked at desperation. She was desperate for money with the inheritance, and given her bad feelings, all these things could lead to the fact that she may have been the one that took the lives of her parents.
With suspicion swirling, police ask Cindy where she was when her parents were killed.
On Friday, she was working and had left at 4:45. They have a time clock. She had punched out.
After work, she had stopped at the store just after 5:30. She purchased beer and ice, and then her and Patrick at a barbecue with the neighbors.
Police work to confirm Cindy's alibi.
She was working. That was verified then. Cindy had stopped at a Quick Trip, and the Quick Trips all have video, so she was on camera at a Quick Trip near her home at the time of the homicides, not anywhere near her parents.
While Cindy is ruled out as the shooter, her husband Patrick comes into focus.
Family and friends said that Patrick did not get along with Dennis and Myrna, and Patrick stood to inherit a substantial amount of money along with Cindy.
Dennis did not like her husband at all. He told me that Cindy's husband married Cindy for the money because he knew that Dennis and Myrna had money. Dennis always complained that his son-in-law, Patrick, was worthless and that he didn't want to work. He sits and plays with the video games, and he's too lazy to go find a job.
Investigators dig deeper into Patrick's relationship with his in-laws.
Talking to family and friends, we learned that Dennis and Myrna were upset when Patrick and Cindy got married. They asked Cindy not to marry him. They felt that he lacked motivation, and they remained unhappy with him. And I think the feeling was mutual.
According to some reports, when there was alcohol involved, he could have been a violent person.
Apparently, the Friday morning of the homicides, Cindy told Patrick that they were not going to be getting any more money. People were saying that Patrick was even more angry than Cindy, that they were being cut off financially. It was a large red flag.
Detectives also learned Patrick had the capability to pull off an execution-style hit.
Eric and other relatives were now pointing us toward Patrick, saying that he was a Marine and that he knew how to handle weapons.
It certainly moves Patrick up to the top of the list as far as suspects.
If Dennis and Myrna Cola believe their son-in-law, Patrick Cowell, has motive for murder.
Patrick was a great interest to us because he did not get along with Dennis and Myrna, and he stood to inherit a lot of money, so it certainly is motive. And Patrick was in the Marine Corps, so he would be an expert marksman.
When I heard that the police are starting to question him, I thought maybe after Dennis mentioned cutting them off, that might have triggered his son-in-law to kill them both.
At the police station, detectives confront Patrick about his relationship with his in-laws.
Patrick said that he was not popular in that family, that he was not comfortable with them. They weren't comfortable with him. There was kind of a cold relationship. He knew from Cindy that they were being cut off from Dennis and Myrna. He wasn't happy about it, but he denied having any involvement in the homicides.
Investigators press Patrick about where he was at the time of the murders.
He was without a job at the time, and basically he spent most of his day on the sofa with Xbox. We asked if he had any guns in the house, and he agreed that he did. We asked if he would turn those over to us, and he said he would.
As detectives wrap up their interview with Patrick, patrol officers are dispatched to collect the gun and gaming console, which are then sent on to the crime lab.
The gun had been analyzed and, in fact, was eliminated as the weapon used to kill Dennis and Myrna.
Also, we were able to prove through the crime lab that he was on the Xbox at the time he said he was. And so that eliminated him because he was home at the time that Dennis and Myrna were killed.
With Patrick ruled out, police are left scrambling for new suspects. The unsolved homicides leave the community on edge.
When a crime like this happens in a small town like Berry Mills, there's a lot of pressure on law enforcement to get it solved. People want answers. These aren't strangers to them. These are people they know.
People in that neighborhood were fearful. You know, the closer you are to something like that, the more concerned you are.
We were kind of scared for our lives because we didn't know why something like this would happen.
Looking for new leads, investigators dig into Dennis's business connections and the wealthy pharmacist's other ventures around town.
Dennis had a nephew, Nick Herring, who was promised a business from Dennis. They were going to open a car dealership together and actually did.
What we understood was that Nick was very familiar with running car dealerships and had done a good job.
Business was good, but then Dennis changed the deal.
As the dealership was up and running, Dennis brought Eric, his son, in to start running it with Nick, and there was some jealousy, maybe bad blood between the two.
Nick was like complaining all the time, so Dennis had to go help out with the business. Dennis said they could not get along together, and he ended up buying Nick out.
At that point, Nick was quite unhappy, and there was some falling out.
Tension mounted until Dennis sold the business, leaving Nick resentful.
Nick lost a pretty substantial amount of money, so he would certainly have reason to be upset.
Could Nick have harbored a deadly desire for revenge? Police bring him into the station for questioning.
We spoke to Nick Herring, and he admitted that the relationship had soured.
Nick had said that Dennis had given him too low amount for the business and that he got cheated out of some profit. Nick felt that he had been treated badly, basically kicked to the curb by his uncle.
Despite the bad blood, Nick insists he's not involved in the murders.
Nick said that it was in the past that he had started his own car dealership. He was successful, and that although it was upsetting, he wouldn't hold a grudge, and he had no reason to kill Dennis and Myrna.
Nick said that he had worked until about 5:30. Then he had picked up his girlfriend, and they'd gone out to the tavern. We were able to confirm that he was at work all day, and then the bartender where they were at could confirm that he and his girlfriend had spent the evening. And so we were able to eliminate him.
Having ruled out yet another suspect, the investigation into the Cola murders hits a roadblock.
It was very disturbing because it just seemed to make no sense. Here's a couple that are a retirement age, had long, successful careers. For someone to come in and just murder them, it's senseless. We were still trying to understand who would do that and what would be the motive.
1 week after the murders, police receive news that jolts the investigation back to life.
We get a call that a patrol car is being sent out to Eric Kula's residence for a suspicious item in the mailbox. Eric said that he had got a threatening letter. He was now extremely concerned that he was going to get killed.
Gunned down in their own home. Police learn their 40-year-old son Eric has received a threatening note. Could he be the next target?
Someone had put this note in his mailbox. He was really, really concerned. This note said, "Fixed you." The message is kind of unusual, but Eric thought they'd killed his parents and were now going to come after him.
He had no idea who would have left it or where it came from.
There was an envelope, but it wasn't mailed.
The handwriting looked like it was done by someone very young. It was so strange. It was probably written that way so a handwriting analysis couldn't be done.
When it comes to Eric's safety, detectives don't take any chances.
We have to try to figure out what was going on.
We had an investigator and a camera to watch his property. We start canvassing Eric's neighborhood to see if anyone saw anything.
But with no witnesses, police are still left with no idea who placed the note.
This is perplexing. We're trying to determine, was this somebody local or was this someone from out of the area? We were very concerned.
With this new potential threat, investigators cast a wider net to find the Cola's killer. But when they scoured Dennis and Myrna's computers, phones, and finances, they're surprised at what they find.
We subpoenaed Dennis and Myrna's bank records and noticed that there's a check written and cashed on Dennis and Myrna's account for $50,000. It's cashed on the day after the murder, and it's made out to Eric Kula and was deposited into Eric's bank account. It seemed really strange. So you just found your parents dead, and the next day you go cash a check for $50K. It had to be looked at.
Detectives reach out to Eric, hoping to learn more details.
Eric's explanation is his dad gave it to him on the day that he had stopped over at his parents' house.
That's very interesting because of all the conversations we had with Eric, he never mentioned this, and suddenly we have a check for $50,000, and if everything was okay, why wouldn't he tell us about it?
To have a check that was deposited the day after the murders by a family member, that set off alarms for investigators.
After we find that check, we look for other checks.
We used a forensic accountant to review Eric's finances because it was quite complicated with the day trading that he was involved in. When the accountant went through it with us and explained what we were looking at, I think we almost fell off our chairs because we had no idea that this was what was going on. He told everybody that he was extremely successful with his day trading, but Eric was broke.
He was day trading, but it was a myth as far as making profit. The person looking at his financials basically called BS. She told us this guy's worth nothing. He's worth about $2,000 total. He was blowing smoke.
Then, police uncover more startling information about Eric's financial circumstances.
We learned that Eric was also going to his parents and receiving large amounts of money. Through the years, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. He led everybody to believe that he was doing so well, including his wife. Eric told her that he was making a lot of money. There was nothing to worry about, that he was just doing great.
Despite everyone's impression that Eric was this successful day trader, his parents had been funding his and his family's lifestyle.
If he was going to have to admit that to family, friends, it was going to be devastating.
Detectives learn when Dennis and Myrna stop financially supporting their daughter, Cindy, they also cut off Eric.
We knew just shortly before Dennis and Myrna were killed, Eric found out that he was no longer getting money from his parents.
The damning evidence continues to pile up against Eric.
Dennis told me he was giving money to Eric, but basically he was done giving to both kids. He says, I need to tell them I'm done supporting them. It's about time I put my foot down and cut them off.
As investigators start to discover that Eric is not what he seems, shocking results come back from the lab.
The state crime lab did a handwriting analysis on that check for $50,000. It wasn't Dennis's signature on that check. We found out that it was Eric's handwriting, that he had forged his father's name on that check.
Everything he's told us is a lie. So things are starting to really roll toward Eric.
Police obtain a warrant to search Eric's home, hoping to find additional incriminating evidence.
We're in the basement. Among other things, was a box of envelopes in a desk drawer. The fixed U note had a security envelope, and every one of them has a different pattern for their security pattern. Lo and behold, those envelopes have the same pattern. We were able to determine that envelope in Eric's mailbox with the fixed U note came from the box of envelopes in his home. From his fire pit in his backyard, we found things that would be associated with making a fixed U note, a spring from a spiral notebook. The letter was written on spiral notebook paper. A barrel of a pen used to write the address. Those types of things are in the fire. So that fixed U note came from his house. It didn't look good for Eric.
In the search, detectives also discover a .22 caliber rifle, similar to what police believe was the murder weapon. The gun is sent to the ballistics lab for testing.
With the lies and forgery, we were pretty confident that Eric was our guy.
But at that point, Eric had an alibi for the entire time that the homicides were occurring. So we're trying to figure out how he shot Dennis and Myrna.
Detectives investigating the double homicide of Dennis and Myrna Cola suspect the couple's own son, 40-year-old Eric, is the killer. But they need hard evidence to lay charges.
We went out and started re-interviewing witnesses and reviewing all the evidence that we had.
As detectives try to learn more details about Eric's connection to the crime, the ballistics results come back. Police wonder if the rifle found in Eric's home will prove to be the murder weapon.
Dennis and Myrna were shot with a .22 caliber rifle, but Eric's gun wasn't the gun that was involved in the crime.
Undeterred, detectives recheck Eric's alibi for when his parents were being murdered.
The time of death, based on the computer analysis, was 5:41 on that Friday.
Prior to the homicide, Eric said that he had helped his buddy Mike renovating a bathroom.
When we originally talked to Mike, he said that Eric had left his house about 5:30, but when we re-interviewed him, he said it's very possible it could have been earlier. Once Mike's story changed, we really thought that we were heading in the right direction.
Investigators take a closer look at Eric's timeline.
Eric had told us that he had gone to 2 stores after leaving his buddy's house to get a specific plant for his wife. At the time of the homicide, he had stopped at the first store, and that store didn't have it, so he had to go to the other store, got the plant, and produced a receipt.
Eric's receipt is stamped 6:15 p.m. The second store is located only 10 minutes from the Cola's residence. But where was Eric at 5:41 when his parents were being shot?
We checked with the garden center, the first one he went to, and they had plenty of those plants on the day and time that Eric said that they didn't have any. We also reviewed video footage, and he's not there, nor is his vehicle seen coming or leaving the parking lot. So there was a window of opportunity for Eric to commit the murders. He had no alibi for the time that the computer showed that Myrna was shot.
With Eric's alibi torn apart, detectives bring him in for another interview. They begin by confronting Eric about forging the $50,000 check.
Eric explained that he had permission from his dad to write checks out to himself, and that his dad had actually given him the check, but just was too busy, so told him to sign it himself. He told us, "I write them all the time," and that was commonplace for him to do that. It's a lie, an approvable one. He's never written one. He couldn't produce a single check that he'd ever written. He was confronted with the fixed U note and about the envelopes, and that they did come from his house. With what we found and what we knew about his financials, all of those things together are great evidence.
We just went down item after item after item after item, and Eric acted, in my opinion, desperate, and he wanted to leave.
But Eric was no longer free to go. On July 29th, 2010, police charge Eric with the murder of his parents, Dennis and Myrna Cola.
What we believe started this whole crime in motion was the fact that Eric was being cut off financially. He was desperate.
Detectives piece together how the double homicide unfolded.
We believe he went to see his mom at their home, and Myrna was sitting at the computer, and then Eric walked upstairs, got the gun that was located in the closet, came down and shot his mother, and then waited for his father to arrive. When Dennis came home, he was shot almost immediately, within seconds after he walked through that door.
After the murders, Eric wipes the gun clean and returns it to the closet.
Eric then took a check and said to himself, $50,000 will get me through until the will is settled.
After he shot his parents, he went to a garden center, bought the plant for his alibi, and went home to celebrate their anniversary dinner that night.
He's as cold-blooded as a murder-for-hire man. His parents did nothing but love him and take care of him his whole life. He's a narcissistic little son of a bitch and thought that his dad owed him a living.
Eric Cola's arrest stuns the community.
Everyone thought that he was this golden child, that he had a great relationship with his parents, that he was this successful day trader. That he could have done this, people were shocked.
I would have never expected Eric to do this. The way Dennis talked about him, always bragged about his son, and I never thought he was the kind of person that would do something like that.
In June 2012, 2 years after Dennis and Myrna Cola were killed, a jury finds their son Eric guilty of intentional murder.
His sister, Cindy, during the sentencing hearing, was sobbing, and she begged the judge in that courtroom to make sure justice was done that day.
Eric Cola is sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, plus 6 years for forgery.
Many times I've thought about how somebody could do that, and I just simply can't fathom it. I guess we all lose a bit of our innocence when this kind of thing happens.
Myrna and Dennis are still dearly missed by their family and friends.
They were such a beautiful couple. They would.
Friday, June 22nd. Another gorgeous sunny day in western Colorado. Devoted moms Barbara Campbell and Paige Bergfeld are enjoying a pool party with their kids.
We'd been playing for a while, and then Paige showed up with her kids. Paige and I hung out for quite a while, and we got to talk more privately.
Barbara has often heard Paige's conflicting feelings about her recent ex-husband.
She started talking to me about Rob and being very worried.
On June 22nd, Barbara notices something out of the ordinary in Paige's manner.
At the pool party, she was downright scared. It was, I am really afraid that something's going to happen now.
Barbara is extremely concerned.
You hate for your friend to say that. You just want to make him safe, and you can't do that. My parting words to her were, don't worry about Rob. To see you, he'd have to come over Red Mountain Pass, and maybe the mountain will just take care of him. So it wasn't real polite, but it's one of those things you say to comfort a friend. I said that, and she kind of laughed, but she was obviously really troubled that maybe I need that to happen. And then she drove off. I certainly didn't know that within a week she would be gone.
4 days later, a local group of mothers has a get-together. On Tuesday, June 26th, about 20 members of the Grand Junction chapter of Moms Club meet for a night on the town.
MOMS stands for Moms Offering Moms Support. And it's an organization for stay-at-home moms, a lot of whom have home businesses and do lots of other things the way Paige did.
Moms Club was always a natural fit for Paige, with her devotion to family and to her children above all else.
Paige loved her children so much. She enjoyed being successful, but I know in her heart of hearts she probably wished that she just didn't have to work at all and could be with them all the time. We were all in awe of her. She probably had a huge influence on a lot of other moms and how they parented because she handled things differently. There wasn't a whole lot of yelling. She wanted to make everything calm and peaceful and stable.
At Tuesday night's dinner party, Paige can't quite maintain her normally sunny demeanor. Her friends notice something is wrong.
We met at the ale house here in town. Paige showed up a little bit late, and she looked gorgeous as always.
She had her normal glow about her. She was here and you were going to notice her. Not because she insisted that you did, but just because that was her presence.
A couple of people said she looked beautiful, but she seemed sad.
There was something in her eyes that was bothering her because that previous Friday where she was at my house and had unloaded all of this fear, and then to see that in her eyes, I was getting really worried for her.
But Barbara does not have the time that night for a heart-to-heart. She still wonders to this day what was on Paige's mind. Paige Bergfeld works hard so she can spend time with her children. Not only does she care for 3 small kids by herself, but she is also the sole financial provider for her family. These responsibilities generate some creative thinking on her part.
Paige found herself in a situation where she was the sole breadwinner to take care of her 3 kids and a large mortgage. I think she displayed some real ingenuity. She set up a series of dance schools.
I'm Paige Bergfeld, and I come once a week to the dance class.
She got into Pampered Chef, and she also sold these slings for nursing mothers. So she'd do different things to make money.
Reporter Nancy Lofholm has covered Grand Junction for the Denver Post for 16 years.
Pampered Chef is a wholesome type of business that women who were home with their kids, it was something they could do because they could have the parties at home and not have to go out and work.
Pampered Chef pays representatives a commission to promote their products through dinner parties.
Paige Bergfeld really made money at it. It sounds like she was good at it.
Two days later, Paige calls her friend Andrea, sounding much more upbeat than the other night.
I was in a hurry, and I rushed the conversation, and of course, hindsight, I wish I hadn't. But she sounded very happy. She sounded like she was really looking forward to the day.
Paige, in fact, has exciting plans. A positive force from her past has come back into her life. Her first love.
I think Paige was fairly typical. You know, Paige, as a high school kid, was kind of skinny, gawky, braces, so forth. I think her first real swept off her feet was Ron Bigler, who was her first husband. That was the big one. She actually got a 4-year scholarship in nursing at the University of Florida in Gainesville. And then Ron Bigler moved down there too. And I would assume that distracted the academic pursuit. So they ended up moving back to Denver and got married fairly promptly after that.
Despite their love for each other, Ron is not yet ready to have children. Their differing feelings about parenthood eventually drive them apart.
Paige knew that family was going to be huge for her. She already had that mothering instinct that her kids were going to be the most important thing in her life. And so that's what kind of led that marriage astray. It was a very amicable divorce, and they wanted different things out of life, so they moved on.
The high school sweethearts always remain friendly. And 9 years later, after Paige is divorced from her second husband, Ron Bigler and Paige get back in touch.
Paige started talking about Ron about 3 months before she disappeared. It was funny because I knew something was up with her. It just seemed like there was a little switch that turned on, and she was just a little more sparkly, a little more happy. She talked to me about how she'd been seeing him and that she still really loved him and that this might be something that would work out.
It was a Thursday. She made arrangements to meet Ron Bigler halfway between Denver and Grand Junction. She drove 2 hours east, he drove 2 hours west.
For Paige, June 28th is starting out to be a very good day.
There's a picnic area, the river runs by, and they spend kind of a late afternoon doing that. She left and came back to Grand Junction. He went back east. When he arrived in Denver, about 2 hours, he called her. She wasn't quite to Grand Junction.
Paige and Ron agreed to talk again later that night when Paige gets home. But Ron never hears from her.
Friday morning, he called her, and her phone immediately rolled over into her voicemail.
This is odd. Because of Paige's children, she never turns her phone off and always keeps the battery charged. All day Friday, Ron continues to call Paige's cell phone.
He called her several times during the day, and it rolled over each time. Never touched base with her. Saturday morning, he called again, and it still did that. This time, he called the house.
And what Ron learns scares him.
My 8-year-old granddaughter answered and said that Paige had not come home Thursday night. Ron, to his great credit, called the Mesa County Sheriff's Office and reported it.
The first time I heard the name Paige Bergfeld was on June 30th, the day that she was reported missing.
This is one of these moments that's freeze-framed in my mind. There's certain events that you just can see it. Everything stops and you can see each detail. I'd gotten a cup of coffee at McDonald's and my cell phone rang, and the caller identified himself as a deputy sheriff with the Mesa County Sheriff's Office. And he said, "Do I know that my daughter Paige has been missing?" And I can just tell you that is a moment that, you just never want to have. I said no. I remember I paused and I said, "If she's missing, you're involved in a crime. She would never have left her kids." He asked me, "Do you know that she was involved in an adult business?" And I said no, and frankly, that's the first I had ever heard of such a thing.
It's the first indication that there may be danger beneath the surface of this model mother's life.
Mother who was missing, and that the circumstances of her disappearance were unusual. This was a mother who, by all accounts, appears to love her children very much and would not deliberately be gone from them.
And I think we were en route within 20 minutes. Boy, when you get a call like that, you realize how nobody gets trained for that moment.
When he reports her missing, Paige's first husband informs the police that she is working in adult entertainment.
What we had learned was that she had been advertising and putting herself out there as an adult escort.
As a family, we didn't know anything about this adult business situation. I'm told by Ron that he knew that she was involved in an adult business, and he was aware she was going to meet clients Thursday night, and I assume we're talking about adult business clients.
Paige maintains a profile on an adult escort website.
NaughtyNightlife.com is a website where you can arrange what appeared to me to be sexual encounters. They advertised everything from threesomes to partner swapping, erotic massage. Paige tried to make her profile look a little more high class than some of the things on Naughty Nightlife. Some of them are pretty raunchy. Paige's picture was just a torso shot, and she was dressed. She advertised herself as filet mignon as opposed to chopped meat.
Investigators are aware that the nature of this business may have put Paige's life in jeopardy.
That brings another level of complexity. But nevertheless, it was learned early on, and it begins to broaden the scope of what we're looking at.
As with Paige's other jobs, she is well organized in her escort business.
Paige advertised that she would be available for in-call or out-call, which I believe means that she would go to their homes, hotel rooms, or she would bring them to her office.
Paige has been renting this office since March 2006, but no one in the building has any idea of what actually goes on in this room.
The landlord thought that she ran an acupuncture office. That's what she had told him, and never had any reason to suspect anything different. One of the odd things that some of the other people in the building had noticed was that in her office she had a pincushion with needles stuck in it. And that's not the way acupuncturists operate. I mean, a true acupuncturist has needles that are sterilized and they're in paper. That just was kind of almost a joke. Other people in Page's office building saw men coming and going, sometimes as many as 4, men in one evening, and they wondered about that. Page would be dressed in kind of skimpy clothes and high heels. She didn't look like she was in the healthcare providing field, but none of them really suspected what was actually going on.
Page lists her services as escort, erotic massage, private dancer, and available for groups and parties. But just how far Page may have gone is unclear.
From reading the critiques on naughty nightlife for Page, I got the sense that there was more happening than massage. They did mention that the extras cost them more, but they were well worth it. I think maybe Page drew a line, no sexual intercourse. I mean, it wasn't prostitution per se.
Whatever line of work Page is in, the job of the police is the same.
It's not our place to make a judgment about the activity. It's our place to investigate the facts and find out what happened.
And ultimately, her friends believe that Page is doing this work because it provides quick and easy money, all in an effort to support her children.
Page needed to make ends meet. She told me that a friend of hers had taught her how to give massages. And so we felt like, well, of course, Page is just giving massages, perhaps not fully clothed or something. But who's to say you can't do that? And we knew the escort side, perhaps dancing at parties. If it happens to be dancing with very little clothes on, Paige didn't have a problem with that. She was very comfortable with herself, with her body, and that's very different than actually having sex with someone.
When first husband Ron Beigler calls the police on June 30th, Paige has been missing for 36 hours. Their first step is to account for where Paige has been during all of that lost time. Her business practices turn out to be a boon for investigators.
We discovered that there were 2 cell phones, one for her and one for her business, and we were able to get information from both telephones.
While Paige's family is in the dark about her adult business, for at least some close friends, Paige's life is an open book.
She never hid anything. She was very open, and I don't think she had anything to hide. For her, it was strictly a business deal.
This isn't the first time that Paige got involved in adult entertainment.
She was stripping in a Denver club, the Mile High Saloon, and her first husband knew about that. I heard from friends and family members that he was not thrilled about her stripping.
In addition to questions about parenthood, Paige's stripping may have caused tension in the marriage. The couple divorce in 1997, while Paige is still dancing at the Mile High Saloon. And it is there that she meets her second husband. But Paige's next marriage will come with its own complications.
In Denver, they hit it off and were married.
Paige's friends explain that she is someone who goes out and gets what she wants. In 1997, she wants Rob Dixon and all the financial security he offers.
When Paige met Rob, he came from a very wealthy family. So in part, she was attracted to that because she could be the stay-at-home mom.
Rob Dixon's family had made a fortune during the 90s.
Rob Dixon's father was one of the pioneers of the cell phone industry and made some money.
In 1996, Rob sets up a foundation that gives millions of dollars to fire departments in Colorado.
Rob Dixon is a trained paramedic. That's what he likes to do. He likes to help people in their time of need. Rob and his father began a foundation, the whole purpose of which was to supply needed equipment to fire departments, paramedics on the western slope of Colorado.
Rob entrusts his money to an investor he meets in a strip club. And for a while, returns are good. The couple moves to Grand Junction in 1998 and starts having children the same year. Rob chooses to make no secret of his money.
This is a town where if you want to fit in, you might get a pickup truck or an SUV. Rob at one time had expensive Porsches. He had Lexus, Jaguars, Range Rovers, a lemon yellow Ferrari.
I got the sense that Rob liked attention and his nice home and his 9 cars. People were very, very impressed.
By this time in 2001, Paige and Rob have 3 children. It seems they have it all. Then, after September 11th, Rob Dixon's finances take a serious plunge, and all this financial turmoil takes its toll on the family.
Over time, I started noticing that I really never saw him. At Paige's house, you would expect Rob to be out mingling. These are basically Paige's closest friends. And he would go in the bedroom and close the door, just avoidance. It set up a really awkward tension. That was really upsetting to her, that he'd make no point of being a part of anything that she was doing.
Frank Bergfeld believes the anxiety surrounding the loss of Rob's fortune changes him for the worse.
I think it was devastating. I think people that beg for, look at me, aren't I smart? To be in the paper day in and day out, having your bad decisions detailed to the community at large, to someone who had been up there with an ego, it's a long plunge down.
As the years pass, Paige's family and friends grow more concerned about her relationship with Rob.
Paige made a 911 call in 2004.
My husband and I were in a fight, and he was supposed to watch my children while I went to work. He didn't seem to be okay, so I said that I was just going to take the children with me. But he wanted the children to stay with him, and he said that I would come home and find them all murdered.
By the time the police got there, it had all been resolved and there was no arrest.
Rob's lawyer says that no arrest was made for good reason. Rob Dixon never threatened to kill the children. Rob and his lawyer believe she made the call for ulterior reasons.
The first time Paige called 911, she made an accusation that Rob Dixon was going to kill the children. That had no basis in truth. The police came to the scene. There was nothing inappropriate going on. Nobody was charged. Rob was befuddled. He had no understanding as to what motivated Paige to make a false accusation about him. But fortunately for Mr. Dixon, it was soon very clear he had done nothing wrong and had no bad intentions. And it may have been the start of her campaign to get Rob Dixon out of the house.
1 year later, in 2005, Paige makes another 911 call.
Paige called 911 and said that Rob Dixon had slapped her and shoved her while she was holding their youngest child. And at that time, he was arrested for domestic violence. According to the court files, Paige said that he had accused her of being a whore because she had clothing in her car that indicated to him that she was going out to do topless massage. Rob said that she had told him that she was having to do that again because they were running out of money.
Rob's lawyer insists that Rob always dutifully supported his wife and family. Rob is arrested on third-degree assault, misdemeanor child abuse, and domestic violence charges.
Rob pleaded guilty to harassment. It was a plea bargain, and he had to go to anger management classes.
In exchange for this plea, the charges are eventually dropped.
Paige Dixon claimed that Rob had struck her and the child. The problem was there were no signs of any injury. What actually happened is that Rob found that she was doing topless massages. That's not really what you want the mother of your children and your wife to be doing. According to Rob, he never laid a hand on her, and he and I believe that that second call was manipulation by Paige. She was done with him.
Rob's lawyer says this is an elaborate ruse by Paige to cast herself as the better parent so she can win custody of the children if they divorce. 2 days after Paige's 911 call, Rob Dixon declares bankruptcy. His Colorado EMT Foundation is unable to pay for equipment it has donated, and taxpayers are forced to pick up the tab.
Rob said that eventually he lost over $10 million. I would think it was more than that.
Not surprisingly, public opinion turns against him.
I would have to say that Rob Dixon came to town as a hero. He was a godsend, and he was Santa Claus. And by the time he left, he was an awful scoundrel, because a lot of the places that he had donated equipment to, it had been repossessed. He had just leased it and then didn't make the payments. And then after he got involved in a fire district here, he invested $3.2 million of their money in a shifty internet company in New York, and that money was lost.
According to her loved ones, Paige and her children are feeling the effects of Rob's reversal of fortune.
The relationship certainly started having cracks and coming apart. As the years went by, we see Rob as a sort of a Jekyll and Hyde personality. When they were first married, we knew virtually 100% good Rob. At the end of it all, it was virtually 100% bad Rob. I actually set up a bank account for Paige that was joint, and the purpose was that if she felt for any reason she needed to get away, she'd have enough money to do it.
Paige's friends never doubt for a minute that her fear of ex-husband Rob Dixon is very real.
One day we were at her house and there was no door on part of the cabinet, and so I asked Paige what that was all about. The oldest son was in trouble and Rob was angry with him, and so he was hiding in that cabinet from his dad. And Rob broke the door on that side of the cabinet when he was pulling the child out of there.
Rob's lawyer explains that Rob did break this cabinet door, but by accident. The door simply came off its hinges, and no child was involved.
It just gives me chills.
Rob starts looking for work out of state, and friends raise the possibility of divorce with Paige.
Rob was brokenhearted, but he's also a bright guy, and it seemed pretty obvious that his marriage with Paige was over. If she was going to be involved in adult services, he was not going to be around.
Paige finally accepts the idea that they should divorce.
That's where I saw her sad a lot more, because her dream was falling apart. She didn't have, the traditional family and the white picket fence. It was all crumbling, and that was very hard for her.
Rob Dixon leaves Colorado, eventually settling on the East Coast. But even after the divorce is final, Paige is documenting her fears about Rob on a website dedicated to pampered chef consultants.
I've looked at the website, and it seems to also be a support group for these kinds of women. They get on and they tell about themselves. And I know that Paige did that. She talked a little bit about her divorce and her problems with her former husband. Paige said that she was afraid of him. One post even said that the kids were afraid that he would come and kill her.
Were Paige's fears real? And was Rob Dixon somehow involved in her disappearance? Friends say that she has told them of her fear of Rob, so when Paige goes missing, this is one of the first things friends mention to police.
I definitely told the police I was concerned about Rob and that he might be a threat.
In any investigation, one of the first things you're going to look at is existing relationships. In this case, Paige Broomfield had 2 ex-husbands. In the case of Rob Dixon, they had a colorful relationship, and it was one that was not without strife. And there were 911 calls, and there was even a prior domestic violence arrest. And it piqued our interest with regards to trying to understand, did they have enough of a rocky relationship that created the motivation to try to harm Paige?
Could Rob's temper have driven him to the ultimate revenge?
It did not change the facts with regards to where we believe Rob Dixon was during the time of her disappearance and what he was doing at the time.
According to Rob, he was at home in Pennsylvania when Paige's family called, completely unaware that Paige had disappeared.
Rob Dixon was worried that something had happened to her, so he packed all his gear and headed for Colorado.
Meanwhile, the sheriff's office is beginning their search for Paige. They start close to home.
In any case like this, you want to do a cursory search of, the house. One of the things that helped us to gain focus was the lack of things that we saw. We didn't see somebody who came home and packed.
About 9:30 that night, a volunteer arrived with her bloodhounds. They went around the house, inside, outside, and then I was told they took them beyond to the desert.
But nothing concrete is found.
Sunday, they were going to go up in an airplane looking for her car.
While searching for her car, investigators are also trying to track down Paige's last moves.
Cell phone records and voicemail were a big clue in this investigation that gives us an idea of who she may have intended to meet with and who, perhaps wanted to meet with her. We were able to identify individuals and contact them and try to learn their whereabouts and learn their relationship to her.
3 days after her disappearance, there is a huge development. Paige's car is found in flames.
Her vehicle then was reported to us on Sunday, found burning in an industrial area of Grand Junction, and it didn't take much to determine that it was probably set deliberately. It's a huge red flag. Now there's criminal behavior involved with it, and it causes you to think about foul play and that there's somebody that appears to be attempting to cover up a connection.
If I didn't know before I knew that point, we have a serious problem here. She is in a real bad spot.
It was probably the thing that made me really start freaking out and thinking that something truly awful had happened.
Finding Paige's car tells police that she made it back to Grand Junction from Eagle on June 28th.
I found out Paige was missing the Monday morning after she disappeared. My husband called and said, she's missing. And I said, well, where's Rob? That was my first concern after everything she had been saying to me.
Mom's Club has a meeting scheduled for Monday afternoon, and it quickly becomes all about what's happened to Paige. The more they think about whether or not Paige would choose to leave her children, the more worried they get.
We assumed she's dead in one respect, but in another respect said if there's any way for someone to be alive, Paige would find it.
Because of another missing persons case in the Grand Junction area, a local search group had sprung up called the Abby and Jennifer Recovery Foundation. On July 14th, at 6 a.m., Paige's loved ones joined this group in a massive effort to find any sign of Paige.
This is a huge county. It's over 3,300 square miles. 74% of it's public land. It's from High Mountain Meadows all the way to Red Rock Canyon country that the Colorado River runs through. There's literally a million places to hide somebody and a million places to go where you have privacy to do things that bad people sometimes do. It's wide open.
I think the first day we had in the neighborhood of 150 people. You just can't believe how hot it was. When you're looking at 115 degrees, it is very uncomfortable. I just can't believe how much people will give of themselves when they see someone in a tight spot. There's a park downtown in which homeless people gather. And I took some of the flyers. I took a box of waters. There wasn't a lot of thank yous. And then I said, I need your help. Those guys pulled around me like a magnet, and they couldn't have been more helpful. They took all my flyers.
The very next day, there is another huge find.
There were some items found in an area approximately 15 miles away from where the vehicle was found on a state highway.
It was exciting and hopeful at the same time that it was terrifying and sad.
They found items from Paige's purse, from her billfold. They found a Blockbuster rental card, her checkbook, cards, normal things people have in their wallet. The items were found on the opposite side of town from where her house is, the opposite side of town from where she would have come into town from Eagle. I think the police looked at the items that they found as possibly kind of a breadcrumb thing that possibly she might have thrown them out of a car. That had them looking then south of Grand Junction along the river. And they had divers, they had boats. The other theory was that possibly they'd been thrown out by someone as a way to divert them.
However these items got there, the volunteers have to keep searching.
You have to be prepared that you're trying to find a dead person is really what we were searching for ultimately. If she was alive, we weren't going to find her on our searches.
If anything is found, it cannot be publicized, for fear it could taint a future trial.
You had to flag anything you thought might be related to her, and that could mean a lot of flags.
Volunteers search throughout the summer.
You don't develop an extreme amount of confidence that you've eliminated all the areas. What you do is develop confidence that you're doing everything you can and moving on to other areas.
But Paige is not found. Despite her friends' concerns, after interviewing Paige's ex-husband Rob Dixon and checking his alibis, police determined that he was not involved. And he is officially cleared.
At this point, I've never uncovered anything that would suggest that Rob Dixon has anything to do with Paige Bergfeld's disappearance.
The Mesa County Sheriff's Department focused on the men in Paige's life, as they should have. But they soon came to the conclusion that neither man could have been involved in Paige's disappearance.
This only makes cops work harder to find a suspect.
We even brought in canines with specific experience in cold trails or cold tracks to try to determine if we could link anything to the car.
These cold case canines sniff out the area where Paige's car was found and lead investigators directly to the door of a local business. A man is about to be named a person of interest. Nearly a month after Paige Bergfeld goes missing, investigators name a person of interest. While much of the evidence must be kept secret in case of a trial, the public learns that canines led straight to this man's place of business.
The canines were useful in tying the car to the business. As a result of that, we're left with Lester Ralph Jones as a person of interest in this investigation to us.
There is talk in the town that Lester Jones and Paige know each other, and that he may be a client whom she refused to meet.
I knew that she knew him. She had talked about her mechanic, Lester. I got the impression that he was very fixated on her.
As best as I can tell, Paige and Jones knew one another, and Paige found Jones repulsive and tried to avoid him.
My husband ended up talking to someone who had a friend who had hired Paige. He said she gives great massages, and he had actually approached her about a full-service massage, and she refused. She said, no, I give massages and that's that. He was like, I'll pay you really well. And she absolutely wouldn't go.
Barbara wonders if perhaps, unlike this friend of a friend, Lester Jones couldn't take no for an answer.
He is big, 6'6", 280. He served time in prison for an act of violence with respect to his ex-wife.
According to Delta County Sheriff's records, in 1999, Jones chased his estranged wife up a mountain road in his car, fast enough to set off her airbags. Her friend jumped out of the car and started running away, and Jones fired a gun at him. The bullets went through his hat.
Mr. Jones was an RV mechanic here in Grand Junction after he had served 3 years of a 5-year prison sentence for domestic violence-related crimes.
Although Jones was imprisoned for assault with a deadly weapon, attempted second-degree kidnapping, and the use of a deadly weapon, Paige's loved ones are not convinced that he is the one.
I see him having a low motive, and I see others that have a high degree of motive.
I know investigators searched Mr. Jones' house at least twice. They were particularly interested in a truck liner. They said they took several bags of things out of the house. They did a lot of searching, but the investigators would never say what they found there or didn't find. And they would also never confirm that they searched his place of business. But I would assume that they did because the dog led over there.
It really doesn't make any sense that someone would go to all the trouble of trying to hide a murder and then put the victim's car in the parking lot next to where they work.
Well, I've never been able to let go of the idea that Rob Dixon was somehow involved in this. He was the only person she mentioned being afraid of.
In the face of intense allegations from Paige's close friends, Rob's lawyer maintains these claims are ludicrous.
Rob Dixon talked with the investigators without a lawyer being present. He said he had nothing to hide. He passed a polygraph with flying colors, so it was pretty clear he could not have been involved in her disappearance at all.
The biggest thing is we need to find Paige. We want to find Paige.
Apparently, Jones and Rob had a connection through their jobs. The two of them had worked for the same fire district, so potentially they stayed in touch. Rob would know that Ralph has a violent background. What better person to set up to knock off your ex-wife?
Neither Rob or I had ever heard of Lester Jones. Jones and Dixon have never met. Jones and Dixon have never spoken. The claim that Lester Jones was being manipulated by Rob Dixon is hogwash, and why anyone would believe that story is beyond us.
In spite of Paige's friends' suspicions and an alleged connection to Lester Jones, the sheriff's office still says Rob Dixon is not a suspect in this case. Neither Lester Jones nor his lawyer have ever made a public statement, and Jones has never been arrested or charged in connection with this case. The open-ended nature of this case leaves friends and family desperate for answers.
Our investigation has not uncovered anything that Paige is still alive. Paige has met with foul play, and we believe that it was likely surrounding her adult entertainment business, and we remain open to other possibilities as well, and won't rule anything out, but that is the focus that we have based on the facts as we know them. It's still a very complex and difficult case, but we're hopeful that something comes up that causes this case to get its day in court.
Certainly as bad as it is and how you fall into the depths of depression and despair, there's also an element of anger. Who is it out there that thinks for whatever purpose they have for themselves that they can take away from my grandchildren their mother?
Received a call. Dawn Walker had gone missing. She had never gone missing before. This was an extraordinary absence.
The neighbours told of hearing screams and banging. Dawn seemed scared of something. She told her daughter, "I feel like something bad is going to happen to me."
She was an inveterate liar. Everything was a fabrication. And the whole picture became clear. He was somebody who was totally intent on protecting himself.
The truth was actually worse. It was chilling.
Three miles east of Halifax in West Yorkshire lies the charming village of Lightcliffe.
It's a nice, close-knit community. It's friendly. Everyone knows the neighbours. It's quite residential, family-orientated.
So I've lived in Lightcliffe for around 4 or 5 years, and my wife's lived here all her life. It's just a very nice feel, close to everywhere you want to be, near to Leeds, near Huddersfield. It's just got everything that you want. So I'd say it's very much a place where people would move to, so it's definitely a sought-after place to want to live, yeah. It's very much a place where, you know, if you're walking down the road and you see someone even in the car or walking, you'd say hello and you'd even stop and have a natter with them.
It is Lightcliffe where Dawn Walker and Thomas Nutt decide to settle down together.
Dawn and Thomas met in 2019 and formed a very strong relationship. Dawn Walker, age 52, is the mother of 3 children. He was a little bit younger than she was. Thomas, age 45, was a scrap metal dealer, a very friendly chap when he dealt with persons in the street or neighbours or anything of that nature. He was one of the boys, we'll say.
I understand that he and Dawn had met through Facebook.
They moved in together and were living in the current house for about 2 years. They had a pretty stable, happy-go-lucky relationship, and they were going to be married.
Thomas and Dawn had been together for 3 years, and then they married on the 27th of October.
Dawn and Thomas got married in Brigg House, and they had a party in the local pub that evening. And in fact, it was a happy affair with about 20 people present.
And they were in good spirits. They had planned the next day to go to Skegness.
There was a plan to go on honeymoon after the marriage, and the arrangement was they would go in the caravan, which Thomas owned. Day after, the couple went on their honeymoon. The daughters of Dawn received messages from her about what was going on, that they were having a good time.
Dawn mentions to her daughter that she'd like to get together when she gets back from her honeymoon.
Arrangements were made for her to meet her when they returned home and to go shopping together in Wilco's in Brigg House.
Despite Dawn's cheery message to her daughters, Thomas divulges that he and his new bride had had a difference of opinion.
During the honeymoon, Thomas messaged a neighbour saying that him and Dawn had a disagreement about when to return home. He claimed he wanted to return home for Halloween for her grandson, and she was not happy, and he also texted a neighbour to say that he had to please the wife.
After their 4-day honeymoon, the couple arrived back in Lightcliffe on the morning of the 31st of October.
It was on Halloween morning that Thomas was in his garden putting up Halloween decorations, which even included police tape.
Thomas is going to town on the Halloween decorations when a neighbour asks after Dawn.
It was then that Thomas told a neighbour that Dawn had not turned up to meet her daughter in Brigg House.
Dawn was due to meet up with one of her daughters and her grandson, and she didn't turn up. And this was highly unusual for her, because she loved her grandson and she loved her daughter.
The neighbour had joked, "Where have you buried her, Tomo?" And Thomas began to cry and became emotional at the question, despite it clearly being a joke.
Thomas then admits that despite having just returned from a happy honeymoon, Dawn had left the house a few hours earlier, and he'd not seen her since, prompting the neighbour to rally the community.
A search was put in hand as a result of the concerns over Dawn's absence, and this was done by neighbours and friends of Thomas.
When the search fails to locate Dawn, Thomas alerts the police to her uncharacteristic disappearance.
The police received a call from Thomas Nutt at 12:30, reporting his newly wedded wife, Dawn Walker, had gone missing from the family home. So the police received that report and assessed it as high risk.
4 days after the wedding, Dawn was declared missing.
Despite the fact that Dawn has only been reported missing for a few hours, police are concerned for her safety and try to determine if there's an explanation for her absence.
Dawn was a mother of 3 and a grandmother of 1.
We know from the information from her daughters that she was a very kind, selfless person, and was only 5 foot tall and very slight build. And she was a mother, she was a sister, she was an aunt, and she was a friend. She would do anything for anyone.
With fears for Dawn's well-being growing, a police officer is sent to Dawn and Thomas's home.
The officer went round on the 31st of October. We know that they expedited to the address to get as much information as possible.
Despite having arranged to speak with Thomas, when the officer arrives, there appears to be nobody home. Then a few minutes later, Thomas appears.
Thomas Nutt told the officer that he'd actually been to the shop. The police officer noted that Thomas Nutt was sweating at the time.
Thomas explains he'd nipped out and, realising the time, had rushed home to meet the police officer.
That was one of the reasons why Thomas said he was sweating, because he was running. When the police officer carried out the initial inquiry with Thomas Nutt, he spent over an hour with him. Thomas told the police officer that his wife, Dawn, was a little bit agitated because of her mental condition.
A concerned Thomas discloses to the police officer that he believes that Dawn had been failing to take her medication.
He was concerned because he said that Dawn suffered from bipolar and depression.
When the police officer leaves, Thomas calls upon a neighbour to help him resume the search for Dawn. They go to a graveyard where the couple would often walk.
He had taken a neighbour with him to look for Dawn at a cemetery, and he said he was glad that he had taken this neighbour with him in case people thought he had killed Dawn.
Meanwhile, friends and neighbours continue to search for Dawn closer to home and come across an unexpected discovery.
They went and looked in fields and bushes behind the property, and they found a suitcase in the bushes close by to the back of Thomas and Dawn's home.
Woman saw the suitcase in the area that had been left. It was her partner that had gone looking for Dawn with Thomas, and upon their return, she let him know of her concerns. And that's when he went and discovered the body in the suitcase.
And the body was identified as that of Dawn.
Lightcliffe, West Yorkshire. 4 days after her wedding to Thomas Nutt, locals have been searching for his missing bride, Dawn Walker.
And the search ended with the discovery of a suitcase in the bushes, and that suitcase contained a body. And the body was eventually identified as that of Dawn.
Halloween, I mean, at first you think it's a joke, and then the more people talk about it, and then when it did come about that, you know, there was a body there, that's when you just think, wow, it's really serious sort of stuff, you know.
This was clearly not a missing persons case. It was a murder investigation, and the police set about dealing with it as best they could, as quickly as they could.
Detectives scrutinised Dawn's movements in the days leading up to her disappearance. Since Dawn and Thomas had been out of town on honeymoon, neighbours report last seeing Dawn at her wedding reception.
Dawn and Tommy left the party at 10:20 or thereabouts, picked up by a taxi and taken home. It took 6 minutes to get back to their home, and they alighted from the taxi and went into the house. The police contacted the taxi driver after the event, and he confirmed that there appeared to be a happy atmosphere in the taxi after he picked them up. Obviously they had been drinking, but there seemed to be a good, happy relationship.
We know Dawn arrived back home on their wedding night. She was spotted on CCTV. It was just after midnight that Thomas Nutt was seen leaving the house again.
He was seen actually going to a cash point, and as he went up to the cash point, he pulled up his hoodie so he couldn't actually be seen facially, and he drew out £200 cash from that cash point. That was drawn out on Dawn's card.
At 1 a.m, he was spotted in the family's back garden, and then at 5:30 a.m, he was observed by a neighbour having a cigarette on the back step as well.
As police look more closely at Dawn's new husband, a worrying picture starts to emerge.
Thomas Nutt had been violent towards a previous partner who he'd become controlling with, not letting her leave the house. In July 2020, Dawn had actually messaged ex-partner of Thomas Nutt's to find out why she had a restraining order put in against him. Nutt had claimed that it was because the woman had cheated on him, but the truth was actually very horrific. The relationship Thomas Nutt had with the woman was marred by violence.
So this is an individual who is using their physique and their physical dominance to dominate and impose their will by means of verbal abuse and physical abuse.
She actually made Dawn aware of Thomas's behaviour patterns, and she actually had a Facebook dialogue with Dawn, trying to warn her about Thomas's conduct and behaviour. Notwithstanding that, Dawn did stick with the man she loved.
The woman then received a message from Dawn in August 21. Dawn said that Nutt had tried to kill her and had bruised her face and tried to suffocate her, but panicked when he saw all the blood.
Dawn's friends and family paint a sinister picture of her new husband, Thomas Nutt.
By all reports, they had a relationship which was abusive. Family members will say that he was controlling. We know that the family were isolated from Dawn, and that Nutt led Dawn to believe that he was the only person that she needed, her protector, her husband, and that she did not need any other relationships. That is completely the modus operandi of a domestic violence perpetrator.
As a result of the investigations made by the police, it became clear that Thomas Nutt was a very possessive man, and he was very, very jealous of Dawn, and he controlled her. He was coercive in his general behaviour towards her. He wanted his own way, and if he didn't get it, it would seem he resorted to violence.
They've had previous domestic history in the past. One neighbour says they heard Tomo get off me.
And neighbours told of hearing screams and banging before.
One of the neighbours went to the house and banged on the door because he could hear screaming that he'd never heard from a lady before. That level of screaming. And Thomas answered the door and said, "Oh, she's not well. Hasn't taken her pills again."
A neighbour had walked into the house and discovered Nutt assaulting Dawn, and she'd complained that he was going to kill her. Dawn was seen in 2020 with having injuries, including a black eye, and it's understood in the days up to her wedding she also messaged a neighbour asking if she should get the hell out of there. On her wedding day, Dawn had even been seen by her daughter shaking and looked to be unhappy. She told her, "I feel like something bad is going to happen." On what was supposed to be her happiest day of her life, Dawn seemed scared of something. Her daughter told her that she was just being paranoid, but she again repeated, "I feel something bad is going to happen to me." The two then left things as they were and continued to prepare for the day.
Police systems tell us that there has been reports of domestic violence. Only 12 months ago, Dawn Walker took the courageous step in reporting Nutt for domestic abuse towards her. We know that this led to the police and Crown Prosecution Service not only charging Nutt but also remanding Nutt. Usually when somebody is remanded in custody, they pose a threat to other people. So that was a real courageous step that Dawn took, and she wouldn't have taken it lightly, but she suffered months and months of abuse prior to that.
Dawn reported Thomas to the police because he beat her up. And she was badly injured, facially, and she alleged that he treated her badly sexually.
We know Dawn urged police to drop the charges because Dawn did not want to prosecute, and there wasn't enough independent evidence. The case was discontinued. But we don't know if there was any contact between Nutt and Dawn during the period he was incarcerated. But we do know she felt compelled to withdraw those charges.
Eventually, when he was released, he then moved in back with her, and she continued to happily or unhappily live with him.
Because Dawn was in a controlling and coercive relationship, he was then able to wiggle his way into the house and the home and her heart again.
In an unexpected turn of events, detectives are contacted by Thomas Nutt's brief.
It's during this time that officers received a call from a solicitor who had said that a man called Thomas Nutt was going to hand himself into the police station.
He handed himself in to police at Halifax Police Station on the afternoon of the 31st of October, having previously, only hours earlier, reported Dawn missing.
Thomas decided, with some reluctance it would seem, to go to the police station and to give an account of what had happened.
Police are investigating the murder of 52-year-old Dawn Walker. They have discovered that her new husband, Thomas Nutt, has a history of domestic abuse. In a surprise move, he has handed himself into police, keen to give his account of how events unfolded when they returned from their honeymoon.
Nutt claimed that the couple had got back from Skegness after 2 days away, and that Dawn had said that she'd wanted a divorce and was going to report him for rape and assault.
He's saying that she threatened to report him again to police, which then caused him to react.
Thomas said that Dawn attacked him, and he had to defend himself from her, and he struck out to defend himself and also to stop her screaming and making threats, etc. Thomas said that he did not intend to cause any harm, but Dawn became aggressive, and that she attacked him, scratched his face with her long nails.
Nutt claimed that he then hit Dawn in the face and put his arm around her neck, and she went limp. He claimed her death was accidental.
He did admit that he had been involved in violence upon Dawn and was responsible for her death, but it wasn't intentional. It was, as he suggested, accidental. That's what he was pushing forward to the police. And in fact, he did, in his explanation, try and get that over by saying that it all happened so quickly and so suddenly, he didn't realise that she was dead until she collapsed.
Thomas Nutt may be claiming his wife's death was accidental, but detectives take a different view.
When Nutt has handed himself into police, it's said that he has killed his wife. He's then arrested for murder.
And there was a lot of talk around the community of, you know, this murder had taken place and how horrific it was. So it was just like quite intriguing at that point as to, you know, what had actually happened.
The family of a woman who was found dead in Halifax on Sunday have paid tribute to her. The body of 52-year-old Dawn Walker was found near Aysgarth Avenue in Lightcliffe. Police have arrested a 45-year-old man and he remains in custody.
And ultimately, when he's interviewed by police, it's a deck of cards then that's fallen down, because once the police have found the body, and the body is obviously met an unnatural death, he becomes a suspect by way of him being the last person that he's seen to see her alive, but also because of the domestic violence history. And he knows that, which has probably led him to go to the police and try and get his point of view forward to the police, even though he's admitted killing her.
Thomas Nutt is charged with the murder of his wife Dawn Walker, but Nutt remains resolute in his account of her death being unintentional.
He says that it was manslaughter and he didn't mean to kill her.
He'd pleaded not guilty, and the trial date was set.
Thomas admitted manslaughter, that he didn't intend to cause her serious bodily harm, and that although he used force upon her, there was no intent to kill. And that was why the prosecution quite properly said, no, we're not prepared to accept that plea to manslaughter, but went ahead with the trial on the charge of murder. Thomas maintained that he only reacted to Dawn when she lost her temper, she attacked him, and he had to restrain her. And that is why he was prepared to maintain a plea to manslaughter.
Nutt's defence that Dawn was attacking him is immediately put under doubt when he walks into the courtroom.
Nutt is an imposing physical person, and we know that Dawn was only 5 foot tall and very slight build. So this is an individual who enjoys and likes to impose his dominance over women. And he was never going to argue that she overpowered him or she threatened him because of the difference in stature. He says that he didn't mean to kill her, but he would say that the size of the man to cause physical injury to her and then to apply such pressure on her throat to kill her, that there would be an intent to murder.
Nutt's attitude in the dock does little to endear him to the jury.
During the trial, Nutt seemed disinterested, which, given the gravity and detail of the horrific crime, is disgraceful.
He appeared cool, calm and collected, and you think, how can a person do this? Appear in the dock, know they're facing a life sentence, and just act so nonchalant about it.
The prosecution revealed to the jury what they claimed to be Nutt's web of lies, starting with the honeymoon to Skegness.
Because his story was that they'd gone off for the honeymoon in the caravan, and they'd spent a couple of nights in the lay-by where they had a good time watching DVDs and things like that. The police obviously took very thorough steps to investigate everything that Thomas said. And one of the things that raised a big question mark was whether Dawn had actually gone to Skegness.
The morning after the wedding, Thomas had been outside the house when a passerby stopped to chat.
A neighbour asked about Dawn because Thomas was up quite early, and he said, oh, she's in bed with a hangover. She had too much to drink last night.
But the prosecution suggests that Dawn Walker was not a big drinker. and had consumed little alcohol at her wedding reception the previous night.
Neighbours had noticed things in the family home and the area that weren't quite right, in terms of the curtains remaining closed at the house, washing remaining on the line. Dawn would always leave the curtains open or take the washing in before they went out.
The evidence from neighbours was that Dawn was the early wake-up person. She got up early, she got up and did things around the house, but on that occasion, she didn't.
The prosecution highlight a further anomaly on the return from the honeymoon.
When Thomas Nutt got back, acquiring the assistance of a neighbour to help him park up the caravan, which was an activity that Dawn would usually do. Even before Thomas Nutt had reported a missing, neighbours and noted things that weren't quite right.
The jury hears how police had scrutinised ANPR cameras along the route the couple would have taken to Skegness.
The CCTV showed that when he left the house, Thomas was clearly in view. There was no sign of Dawn. She wasn't in the passenger seat, and he actually put things on that seat, and she wasn't anywhere to be seen. And on the trip down to Skegness, various cameras, CCTV cameras, showed there was nobody in the passenger seat. So the police did a thorough investigation of CCTV down to Skegness, and every bit of evidence from CCTV showed that Dawn was not in the car. So she wasn't visible on the way down to Skegness, and on the return journey from Skegness, there were other camera shots, CCTV shots, which also showed no Dawn.
Despite Nutt's defence that Dawn's death was an accident, when they returned home from their honeymoon on the 31st of October, the evidence dictates otherwise.
The last person to see Dawn was her maid of honour after the wedding celebration in the pub, and eventually the taxi driver. And beyond that, the only person who claimed to have seen Dawn was Thomas Nutt. Everything about her going to Skegness and things that would supposedly happened were untrue. Dawn had not gone to Skegness. He killed her on the night of the wedding.
Thomas Nutt is standing trial, accused of the murder of his new wife, Dawn Walker. The prosecution are claiming that he killed her on their wedding night.
We know Dawn was last seen on CCTV of showing her and Thomas Nutt arriving home after their wedding. This was just after midnight, and she could be seen on the CCTV getting out of a taxi and arriving home. So we knew she'd arrived home, but she was not seen again after that.
But Thomas Nutt maintains that he and Dawn enjoyed their honeymoon together, and that while away, Dawn was even messaging her daughters.
There's an expectation that he goes on honeymoon, and there's also an expectation that she will want to speak to family and friends. We know that when he was in the caravan, that he communicated purporting to be Dawn to a daughter. Again, all knowing that he had already killed her mother. We know that on the 30th of October, he again, purporting to be Dawn, messaged and contacted the daughter, asking to meet up in Brighouse the following day. Again, keeping that pretence up that she's alive.
Thomas Nutt has said he'd killed Dawn on the 30th, but she had not actually been seen since the night of her wedding. He probably said that he'd killed her on the 30th because it was less time, and also he's not been preventing a lawful burial for as long as he would have been had he fessed up to killing her on the 27th.
Having killed her on the night of the wedding, Nutt goes ahead with their planned 3-day honeymoon to Skegness.
Because it's a spontaneous act, He's now thinking, what do I do? And from that moment on, he's then now got to deal with the fact that he's a newly married man. There's an expectation that he goes on honeymoon. How does he explain her absence? And indeed, if he has to speak to the police and undergo scrutiny, how will that bear out? What will he say? All the while, he is having to react and think on the spot, which is why I believe he went to the caravan in Skegness to give himself some thinking time.
But instead of parking up in a caravan park, Nutt took the safer option of an isolated lay-by.
I believe the motive for that is it's better to take to a lay-by than a concentrated campsite where there's more people going to sort of find out that actually she wasn't with you.
On his return from the honeymoon, and having bought some thinking time, Nutt reports his wife missing.
It's understood that when he reported her missing, Dawn's body was still in the house.
He says that he put her in a cupboard in the kitchen. Bodies decompose according to the temperature in the environment that they're left, and also what they're left in, whether it's, you know, if it's in mud, grass, where you've got animals, that can then obviously affect the body. But what we believe is that Dawn was in the house, so she was protected from the elements.
The evidence clearly pointed to the fact that the body of Dawn had been hid in a cupboard until Thomas came back from Skegness. And it was only following his return, when the issues of her going missing became apparent, that he perhaps panicked and he decided to hide the body. And that's when he stuffed her body into the suitcase and pushed it over his garden in the back field.
But the most damning evidence yet is CCTV retrieved from Thomas and Dawn's own home on the day he reported her missing.
CCTV was obtained, which showed Nutt taking a heavy object, believed to be a suitcase with wheels. We now believe that had Dawn's body inside, and dragging the suitcase out of the back garden. Nutt is an imposing character and is an imposing frame. Even for his size, to drag a body in a suitcase would have taken great strength and great effort. So the deposition site of the body would always going to be nearby.
And the prosecution suggests that the place selected to leave Dawn's body was chosen by Nutt in order to avoid detection.
When you're dragging such a heavy object, and it's in an unnatural way down a street or across a field, the chances of you being exposed or seen by a dog walker or a neighbour or a member of the community as being out of the ordinary is that bit greater. Because when he had dragged the body to the deposition site, he'd already reported Dawn missing.
There is a further revelation in the time of day this footage was filmed.
CCTV captured him returning just in time for an officer to speak with him about Dawn's missing person case. The police officer noted that Thomas Nutt was sweating at the time. Thomas Nutt told the officer that he'd been to the shop. It was after the PC left that Thomas Nutt was then seen on CCTV going back into his garden to conceal the marks left by the suitcase. It was broad daylight that Thomas Nutt decided to move Dawn's body and put it in an area behind the couple's home.
The defence raised questions as to why Nutt would take such a risk, but the prosecution have a compelling theory.
So after Thomas Nutt had reported Dawn missing, he was made aware that a visit would be made by an officer. And it was then that he began to panic that they would discover Dawn's body. Thomas Nutt got rid of her body because he knew the police were going to search his house.
It is Dawn Walker's post-mortem results that expose the most disturbing details in the case against Thomas Nutt.
Dawn had suffered significant injuries before and after her death. Before death, she had received injuries to her face, including a laceration and bruising.
Dawn had been strangled. The damage to the neck being caused with considerable force.
After her death, she'd received injuries to her ribs, including fractures and breaks, which was significant as they suggested that she had been put into the suitcase after her death.
She was a 5-foot lady, and he broke her legs to get her into that suitcase, which showed a complete disrespect for his wife, who he'd murdered or killed, as he would say, accidentally.
So there will have been rigor mortis from Dawn, which explains why Nutt had to break her legs and such like to squeeze her into the suitcase, because her body would have been stiff, but she suffered immensely by the sounds of it.
With all the details of the investigation now laid before the court, it is down to the jury to decide if Thomas Nutt is guilty of murder or the lesser charge of manslaughter.
It is very difficult to determine what goes through the mind of a person when they are attacking somebody else. Was he intending to kill? Was he wanting to harm her in such a way that she would never recover? Was he just a violent person who lost his temper? Was he a narcissist who couldn't tolerate being challenged? Was he a psychopath? Who knows what was in his mind? Who knows what drove him?
The jury was sent out on the 10th of August, shortly after 10 a.m, and returned at 2:30. They'd unanimously reached a verdict of guilty for murder.
He sat at the back of the court listening to everything, and then when he was found guilty, it said an expletive to the judge and showed absolutely no remorse whatsoever. The judge summed up to say that he was a bully and that he was a threat to women, and that he'd used his physicality to impose his will on women.
The West Yorkshire man who killed his wife on their wedding night and stuffed her body into a suitcase has been jailed for life. A warning: you may find the following video distressing. Police have released CCTV footage showing 46-year-old Thomas Nutt with the suitcase before he dumped Dawn Walker's body in bushes behind their home in Lightcliffe near Halifax. Nutt had strangled the 52-year-old just hours after they were married.
Thomas Nutt was handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 22 years, less time spent on remand in custody. He was told by the judge that he would spend 21 years behind bars before going before the parole board, who will determine whether he is safe to be released. The judge said Dawn had been subjected to domestic violence throughout the course of their relationship.
Everything was a fabrication, and the whole picture became clear. That Thomas was an inveterate liar. He was somebody who was totally intent on protecting himself, having killed Dawn, and kept it up until, in fact, the last minute, until, of course, he was exposed as a liar and a murderer.
The way this case played out was one of the worst cases of domestic violence that I've seen in my career. In particular, the way that Thomas Nutt treated his wife after she died, his disregard for her and her dignity overplayed anything else. He had no compassion and no remorse for what he'd done.
What I would do is to urge anyone who is listening to Dawn's story and other countless victims of abuse to come forward, report to the police. You are not alone. There is a wealth of support out there for you.
The court heard statements from both Dawn's daughter and her sister. Dawn's daughter said she lost a part of her when she got the call saying that her mum's body had been discovered. She described Dawn as a beautiful soul and said she had lost her greatest support.